I still remember the day I walked into the courtroom for the first time, hands trembling, heart heavy, eyes swollen from too many sleepless nights. I was only 26, but I felt older than my years, aged by betrayal and pain. My family, the people I trusted the most, had refused to give me my rightful share of the property my late father left behind. My uncle said I didn't deserve it because I was a girl. My brothers turned their backs, pretending the matter wasn't theirs to care about. And there I was, standing all alone, with a file of documents in my hand and a storm in my heart. The courtroom was cold that morning, the kind of cold that doesn't come from the air, but from fear. Lawyers whispered, papers rustled, and people exchanged glances that made me feel smaller. I sat at the corner of the wooden bench, watching people come and go, wondering if anyone there had ever felt the kind of pain I was feeling. Then she entered. The room seemed to change the moment she walked in, not because of her power, but because of her calm. The judge was a woman in her early 40s, graceful yet firm, her black robe flowing as she took her seat. Her nameplate read Justice Anaya Siddiqui. Her eyes were sharp but kind, the kind of eyes that could silence a crowd, but also make a broken heart feel seen. When my case was called, I stood up with trembling hands, my voice barely audible. I could feel the judgmental stares of my relatives behind me. My lawyer spoke, but his words floated past me. All I could hear was the sound of my heartbeat. Then, in the midst of all that noise, her voice cut through, steady, composed, and strangely comforting. "Take your time," she said softly. "Speak when you're ready." It was such a simple sentence, but it felt like someone had opened a window in a suffocating room. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just a judge, but a woman who understood pain. She listened to me like no one ever had. Every detail I shared, every lie my relatives told, every memory of being told I didn't belong. She absorbed it with quiet attention. There was no impatience in her eyes, no superiority, no distance, just empathy. During the hearing, my uncles tried to twist the facts. My brothers acted innocent, and my lawyer stumbled under pressure. But she saw through it all. Her questions were sharp, cutting through their excuses like glass through silk. Every time she spoke, her tone carried a balance of authority and humanity, something I had never seen before. For the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt protected. Days passed between hearings, and each time I entered that courtroom, I found my fear fading little by little. I began to look forward to hearing her voice, calm, deliberate, fair. She didn't smile much, but when she did, it was enough to make the world outside the court fade away. Then came the final hearing. I remember that morning clearly. The smell of old files, the hum of ceiling fans, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. When she began to read the verdict, I closed my eyes, praying silently. Her voice was steady as ever. "Based on the evidence and testimony presented," she said, "the court rules in favor of the petitioner. The property rightfully belongs to her." I froze. It took a few seconds for the words to sink in. I had one thought: the courtroom buzzed with whispers. My uncles' faces hardened with defeat. My brothers avoided my eyes, and I just stood there, unable to move. Tears filled my eyes, not just for the victory, but for the feeling of finally being seen. As the session ended, I gathered my papers, still trembling. I looked toward her one last time, unsure if I should say anything. But when our eyes met, she gave me a brief, knowing nod, not as a judge, but as a woman who understood. That small gesture meant more to me than all the legal words written on that judgment paper. Outside, the sun was setting. I stepped into the light, the weight of injustice slowly lifting from my shoulders. Yet, as I walked away from the courthouse, I realized something unexpected. What lingered in my heart wasn't just relief. It was her Her voice, her calmness, her compassion, they stayed with me. That night, as I held the court papers in my hands, I thought about her eyes, the warmth in her tone, and how, in a world filled with cruelty, she had chosen to be kind. I had come to the court seeking justice, but I left with something I couldn't name. Something that made my chest ache and my heart quietly whisper her name, and that was the beginning of something I never saw coming, the story of how justice met kindness, and how kindness turned into something far more dangerous, love. Days passed after the verdict, but my mind refused to let go of her. Even though the case was over and I had already received the court's written judgment, I found myself replaying her words again and again. Her calm voice, her careful way of speaking, and that faint, fleeting softness in her eyes when she looked at me. It was strange how someone I had met only inside a courtroom could leave such a lasting silence in my heart. The world around me moved on. My family distanced themselves further. My friends congratulated me and then forgot, but I was stuck in the echo of her voice every evening. I'd sit near my window, holding a cup of tea, imagining her in that black robe, strong, dignified, and unreachable. But beyond that robe, beyond her authority, I wondered, who was she really? What kind of life did she return to after court ended each day? Fate must have been listening, because a week later, I saw her again, not in a courtroom, not behind a desk, but in the most ordinary place possible, a small cafe tucked away on a quiet street near the courthouse. It was raining that day. Soft, patient rain that blurred the city's chaos into something almost peaceful. I had gone there to escape my thoughts, to find a little warmth and a cup of coffee. And then I saw her sitting alone by the window, reading a book. Her robe was gone. Instead, she wore a light gray sari, her hair loosely tied, a pair of glasses resting delicately on her nose. For a moment, I froze. My first instinct was to leave. She was a judge, after all. What reason did I have to disturb her? But then she looked up, and our eyes met. Recognition flashed in her gaze, followed by something I didn't expect, a smile. "Miss Alia, isn't it?" she said, her tone warm and familiar. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied nervously, still half standing. She laughed softly. "No robes today. Just Anaya." That single sentence broke every wall between us. I hesitated, then joined her. What began as a polite conversation quickly turned into something more human. We talked about the rain, about how the smell of coffee reminded her of her university days, about how she missed the sound of laughter in her house. I listened, surprised by how open she was. For the first time, I saw the woman behind the robe. Anaya wasn't just calm and composed. She was thoughtful, curious, and quietly wounded. She told me she had been married for 15 years, but spoke of her husband as if he were a distant relative, someone who existed, but not in her heart. "He's a good man," she said once, her eyes on the rain. "Just not the right one for me." There was a kind of loneliness in her voice, not loud, but deep. The kind that doesn't ask for pity, only understanding. Over the next few weeks, we ran into each other more often, or maybe we both found excuses to. Sometimes it was at the same cafe, other times at a nearby bookstore or park. Our conversations grew longer, our words slower, our silences softer. She'd ask me about my life after the case, how it felt to stand on my own. I told her it was strange but freeing. She'd listen with that quiet intensity again, as if my every word mattered. And when she spoke, I found myself drawn not just to what she said, but how she said it, each word wrapped in thought, each pause deliberate. Once, she mentioned she loved poetry. She quoted a line that stayed with me: "We fall in love with those who listen, not those who speak." She looked at me when she said it, and my heart skipped. There was no confession, no touch, no flirtation, only something unspoken passing between us. like a shared secret the world wasn't meant to understand. Began to notice the small things, how her fingers lingered on the rim of her cup when she was deep in thought, how her laughter always came half a second late, how she avoided talking about herself too much. And every time she said goodbye, it felt like something incomplete was left hanging in the air. One evening, as we sat in the same cafe again, the world outside was drowning in rain. The sound filled the silence between us. She looked out the window and whispered, "You know, sometimes I think we meet certain people not by accident, but because we need them." I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened, my heart thudded against my ribs. I just looked at her, at the way her eyes reflected the rain outside, and smiled faintly. Something had shifted. I didn't dare name it, and neither did she. But as we sat there, watching the raindrops slide down the glass, I realized the truth. I was falling for her dot. It wasn't like a rush of passion or a fantasy. It was quiet, slow, and terrifyingly real. I didn't just admire her anymore. I longed for her. For her presence, her warmth, her understanding dot, and though I knew she was married, that there were lines neither of us should cross, I couldn't help but feel that something between us had already begun. Something gentle, dangerous, and inevitable. When she finally stood to leave, she touched my hand lightly, just for a moment, and said, "Take care, Ilya." It was nothing, just a polite farewell. But her touch lingered long after she left, burning softly against my skin, reminding me that some moments don't need promises to change everything. The night it happened didn't feel planned. It felt inevitable. A few weeks had passed since that rainy evening at the cafe. We still met often, pretending our meetings were accidental. Sometimes she'd ask if I was doing all right living alone now, and sometimes I'd ask if her court schedule was wearing her out. But beneath those simple exchanges, something heavier was always there, the awareness of what was growing between us. Then, one evening, she called. Her voice was softer than usual. "Aaliyah," she said, pausing for a breath, "would you have dinner with me tonight? Somewhere private? I just need company." I don't remember what I said, only how my heart started to race. The restaurant she chose was quiet, tucked inside an old building far from the city's noise. There were no reporters, no familiar faces, no robes or files, just her, sitting at a small table by the window, her hair loose, her face lit by the amber glow of a candle. When I arrived, she looked up and smiled faintly. "You came. I wouldn't have missed it," I whispered. For a while, we talked like we always did, about ordinary things, as if pretending that nothing had changed. But something had. The pauses between our words grew longer. Her eyes lingered a little too long. My laughter came out softer, more careful. After dinner, we sat in silence for a while, the hum of the city muffled behind glass. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the kind that comes from years of pretending. "Can I tell you something personal?" she asked. "Of course." She sighed, staring at her glass. "My marriage. It's been over for years, even if the papers don't say so. We live in the same house, but in different worlds." He's polite, distant. We don't fight, we don't talk, we just coexist. I could see the pain behind her composure, the loneliness she never showed in court. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "That must be hard." She gave a tired smile. "You know, I thought I had accepted it. That love wasn't for me anymore. But lately," she stopped. Her voice trembled just slightly. "You've made me remember what it felt like to be seen." My chest tightened. I wanted to speak but couldn't. The air between us grew fragile, like a secret waiting to break. I don't know what pushed me to say it. Maybe courage, or maybe something reckless. But I finally whispered, "I think about you all the time, Anaya." Her eyes widened, not with shock, but with understanding. I rushed to explain, my words tripping over each other. I know it's wrong. You're married and I have no right. But you've been kind to me in ways no one ever has. You made me feel safe again. You made me believe I mattered. For a long time, she said nothing. The silence stretched between us until it hurt. Then she reached across the table and took my hand, just a small, trembling touch. Her fingers were warm, hesitant. You shouldn't say that, she whispered. It's dangerous. I know, I said. But it's true. The candle between us flickered. The world outside faded into darkness. She looked at me then, really looked, and I could see the battle in her eyes. Duty against desire. Morality against emotion. For a moment, I thought she'd pull away, end it all before it began. But instead, she said softly, I don't know what this is, Aaliyah, but I can't deny it anymore. It wasn't a confession or a promise. It was a surrender. That night didn't end with grand gestures or reckless words. It ended with quiet understanding. Two people choosing each other for the first time, despite knowing they shouldn't. After that evening, something unspoken connected us. We didn't need to define it. We just let it exist in small moments, shared tea in silence, glances that lasted too long, messages that came late at night, saying nothing and meaning everything. We began meeting away from familiar places, sometimes a quiet corner of the city, sometimes a rented room where we could talk freely without the weight of titles or judgment. There was never anything loud or wild about our time together. It was gentle, fragile, and full of care, but beneath that tenderness was a quiet guilt that neither of us could escape. She was still married. I was still the woman who made her question her boundaries. Every time we met, joy and guilt walked hand in hand. Still, we couldn't stay away. There was a peace in her presence that I had searched for all my life. And for her, I think, there was comfort in being seen, not as a judge, not as someone bound by law, but simply as a woman who wanted to be understood. Looking back, I realized that night wasn't just the beginning of love. It was the beginning of everything that would one day break our hearts. After that night, life changed in ways I couldn't explain. Every morning began with her name on my screen, a short message, a greeting. Sometimes just a single word, good morning. But even those two words carried warmth enough to last me the entire day. She had become the first thought in my mind when I woke and the last one before I fell asleep. I measured time not in hours anymore, but in moments, the minutes between her replies, the days between our meetings. We saw each other quietly in corners of the city that belonged to no one. Small cafes where no one cared who we were, quiet parks hidden behind trees, sometimes a small guest house on the edge of town where no one asked questions. To the world, we were strangers, but in those moments, we were everything to each other. She had a way of making ordinary moments feel sacred, pouring tea, brushing a strand of hair from her face, reading something out loud, and glancing up just to see if I was listening. And I always was. I could have watched her for hours, memorizing every quiet expression she never showed to anyone else. But behind the peace, there was always a shadow. Anaya carried her guilt like a second skin. Sometimes she'd pause mid-laughter, her eyes turning distant. I'd ask what was wrong, and she'd shake her head, forcing a smile. Nothing. Just thinking. But I knew she was thinking about him, the husband who still wore her ring, the home she returned to every night after leaving me. I never asked questions I wasn't ready to hear the answers to. But the silence between us began to grow heavier. One afternoon, as we sat by a window watching rain paint the city gray, she said quietly, "Do you ever wonder what we're doing, Elia?" I looked at her. All the time. She turned her gaze back to the rain. Every day I stand in that courtroom, telling people to choose truth over desire, right over wrong. And then I come to you, and everything I believe in starts to blur. Her voice trembled, but her hand found mine anyway. And yet, when I'm with you, I feel more honest than I've ever been. I didn't have the courage to answer. I just held her hand tighter. Our love existed in borrowed time, hidden behind curtains, beneath the hum of city lights, inside messages that would be deleted before dawn. But those moments were mine, and I lived for them. Still slowly, the weight began to show. Her messages grew shorter, her replies slower. Sometimes she'd cancel our plans at the last moment, saying there was an unexpected hearing or a family dinner she couldn't avoid. I'd tell her it was fine, but the silence after the call would leave a hollow ache in my chest. One evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer. We were together in that same quiet cafe where we had met months ago. She was distracted, her phone lighting up again and again with calls she refused to answer. I asked gently, "Are you still happy?" "With us?" She looked up, startled. "Why would you ask that?" "Because sometimes you look like you're somewhere else," I whispered. "And I'm scared that one day you'll choose that world, the one you're supposed to live in, over this one." She reached across the table and touched my cheek. "Aaliyah," she said softly, "if this world were fair, you'd be mine openly." Her words were heavy, beautiful, and devastating all at once. We didn't speak after that. The rain kept falling, the candle burned low, and I realized that love like ours was never meant to be free. It had to live in shadows, hidden from eyes that wouldn't understand it, yet the more forbidden it became, the more desperate we grew. We started writing each other letters, not to send, but to read together when we met. Words we couldn't speak in public became ink on paper. She'd tell me how my presence made her feel alive again, how she wished she'd met me when life was simpler. I'd write about how she made me see myself differently, not as a victim of betrayal, but as someone worthy of being loved, that even as our hearts grew closer, our world grew smaller. Every time we said goodbye, the goodbye lasted a little longer. Every time she looked back before leaving, her eyes carried something unspoken, fear, maybe, or guilt, or both. I began to feel the cracks forming beneath the beauty. There were nights when she didn't answer my calls, mornings when she sounded distant. Once, I heard a man's voice faintly in the background during one of our calls. Her husband? Perhaps, and she quickly ended it, whispering, "I'll call later." That later didn't come for days. I started walking by the court again, not to see her, but to feel closer to the version of her I had fallen in love with, the woman in black robes who once gave me justice and unknowingly took my heart. Love was beautiful. Yes, but it was also exhausting. We loved quietly, hid constantly, and hurt endlessly. And through it all, I couldn't escape one truth. For every moment I had her, I was losing a piece of myself. Sometimes, when we were together, I'd look at her reflection in the window, her face half lit, half shadowed, and I'd think this is who we are. Two people trapped between what's right and what's real. And even though a part of me knew that this love could not last, I also knew I'd still choose her every single time. Because in a world that had given me nothing but cruelty, she had given me warmth, even if only in secret, even if only for a while. It happened on an ordinary Thursday, the kind of day you never expect to change your life. I was at the small cafe where we used to meet, waiting for her with 2 cups of tea going cold between my hands. She was late, but that wasn't unusual anymore. What was unusual was the message that arrived instead of her. "Don't come near the court. Don't message me, please." No explanation. No goodbye. Just fear. My heart stopped. I called her again and again. She didn't answer. By evening, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. Later that night, she finally called. Her voice was trembling, quiet, broken, unlike the woman who once commanded entire courtrooms. "Aaliyah, he knows." I froze. "Who?" "My husband," she whispered. He found the messages. He saw everything. The world around me went silent. I could hear her breathing, shaky and desperate, as if she was trying not to cry. He confronted me, she continued. He screamed, asked if it was true, and I couldn't lie anymore. I couldn't hide you. Her words cut through me like glass. What will you do? I asked, barely managing to speak. I don't know, she said. But whatever happens, we can't meet again. Not after this. No, I whispered, panic flooding through me. Please don't say that. We'll fix this. We'll explain. There's no fixing this, she said, her voice breaking. Elia, I'm a judge. My life is built on morality, on perception. If this goes public, everything ends. My career, my family, everything I've worked for. And what about us? I asked, my throat tightening. There was a long silence. Then she said softly, love isn't always meant to be lived. Elia, sometimes it's meant to be remembered. I wanted to scream, to beg, to tell her that love shouldn't be something we had to remember like a crime. But the line went quiet, and I knew deep down that she was already slipping away. The next few days were a blur. I didn't see her at the court. Her number stopped working. Rumors began to spread, whispers about an affair, a scandal, someone leaking something to the press. No one said names, but I didn't need to hear mine to know it was there. I'd walk past the courthouse gates, hoping to catch even a glimpse of her, but her car never came. Her chambers remained locked. Then, one evening, she appeared at my door. Her face was pale, eyes swollen from crying. She stood there, rain dripping from her hair, holding herself as if the world had already punished her enough. I shouldn't be here, she said softly. Then why are you? I asked, because I couldn't leave without seeing you one last time. Her words broke me. I pulled her inside, and for a long time we said nothing. The sound of rain filled the silence between us. She reached out and touched my cheek, tracing it with trembling fingers like she was memorizing me. I've asked for a transfer, she said finally. Another city, somewhere quiet. I shook my head, tears falling freely. No, don't do this. You don't have to go. I do, she whispered. This isn't about choice anymore. It's about survival. Her hands were cold, her touch shaking. You were the one thing in my life that ever felt pure. But if I stay, they'll destroy both of us. And I can't let that happen. I held her, refusing to let go. Please, Anaya, just one more chance. We'll disappear. We'll start over somewhere else. She smiled sadly. You think love can survive without air? We'd suffocate, Elia. We already are. The silence that followed was unbearable. There were no more words left, only the sound of our hearts breaking quietly together. She leaned in and kissed me, gently, as if sealing a memory instead of a promise. It was soft, slow, and final, the kind of kiss that says I love you and goodbye at the same time. When she finally pulled away, her eyes were wet. Thank you, she said, for reminding me that I could still feel something real. And then she turned and walked to the door. I watched her go, her silhouette fading into the rain, her footsteps disappearing with every drop that hit the ground. She didn't look back. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she knew that if she did, she'd never be able to walk away. I stood there long after she was gone, the echo of her voice still lingering in the room. Love had found me in the most impossible place and left me the same way. Days later, I heard she had resigned. The news called it personal reasons. No one mentioned the truth. No one ever would, sometimes when it rains. I still see her reflection in the glass, the same woman who once smiled at me from across a courtroom, who taught me that love isn't about winning or losing, but about feeling. Even if it destroys you, she left with her reputation intact. And I stayed with the ruin of a love we couldn't live, but would never forget, because some endings aren't failures, they're sacrifices. And she sacrificed everything just to love me in secret. It's been 8 months since the day she walked away. And yet, some mornings, I still wake up expecting her message, the little good morning she used to send before court sessions, the one that always made me smile before the world had a chance to hurt me again, but now my phone stays quiet. The silence that once felt unbearable has turned into something softer, a reminder instead of a wound. Often visit the same cafe where we first met. The barista still recognizes me. She doesn't ask questions, but she always brings 2 cups of tea, one untouched, one for me. I let it sit there across the table, the steam rising like a ghost of our past. Sometimes I even catch myself looking toward the door, half expecting her to walk in with that calm, elegant smile that once disarmed me completely. She never does, of course. But I still wait for a moment, not because I expect her to come back, but because waiting feels like a way of keeping her alive. Life after her wasn't easy. Winning the case had given me the land, the property, the justice I had fought for, but losing her made me realize something deeper. That love, when true, doesn't need permanence to be real. She taught me that when I had walked into that courtroom. I was just a broken girl fighting for what was hers. When I walked out after meeting her, I was someone who had learned to believe again, not in people, not even in love itself, but in kindness. She gave me that quietly, selflessly, without ever promising forever. Sometimes I still hear her voice in my head, calm and steady like it always was. Don't let the world turn you cold. Alia, no matter what it takes, hold on to your warmth. Those words have become my anchor. I've started working with women who face what I once faced, helping them fight for their rights, guiding them through court procedures, making sure no one stands alone the way I once did. Every time I sit beside a frightened woman trembling before a judge, I remember her, my judge, and how she made me feel safe just by listening. Maybe that's her legacy living through me. Maybe that's how love continues, not through presence, but through impact. One evening, I found myself walking past the old courthouse. The sky was orange, the city fading into the hum of evening traffic. I stopped at the gate, staring at the tall building where our paths had crossed, where justice met kindness, and kindness turned into something far more dangerous and beautiful. For a moment, I almost saw her there, walking down the steps in her black robe, her hair pinned neatly, her eyes meeting mine across the crowd. But when I blinked, it was just the wind. I smiled through the ache. Because some ghosts don't haunt you, they guide you. People often say love is meant to last. I don't think that's true anymore. Some loves are meant to change you, not stay with you. She changed me, the way I see love, justice, even myself. Before her, I thought strength meant winning battles. After her, I learned strength sometimes means letting go with grace. Tonight, I sit by the same window in the cafe. The rain falls gently outside, tapping the glass like it used to, and she and I sat here sharing quiet moments that said more than words ever could. Take out a small piece of paper, one of the few things I still have in her handwriting. It's from the day she handed me the court verdict. At the bottom, she had written a single line: justice isn't always about laws. Sometimes it's about giving someone back their voice. I traced the letters with my fingers, my eyes blurring with tears that no longer hurt the same way they used to. They feel lighter now, like gratitude instead of grief. In the end, she gave me 2 verdicts. One in court that gave me my property, and one in life that gave me myself. Both were acts of love. Both changed everything. She gave me justice once in court, and love outside it. Both were taken away too soon, but I carry her verdict in my heart to never stop believing in love, no matter how forbidden. The screen fades to soft light through rain-speckled glass. A cup of tea grows cold on the table, the chair opposite empty. And in that stillness, her memory lingers, not as pain, but as peace.